If you grew up in the 1980s, you remember rushing home to catch ThunderCats every afternoon. Lion-O holding the Sword of Omens high, Mum-Ra transforming in his pyramid, Snarf being Snarf. But behind that show we loved were stories of tight budgets, creative battles, and decisions that almost made ThunderCats very different from what we remember. These are ThunderCats' 12 epic facts you didn't know. Number 12. The show was created to sell toys that didn't exist yet. ThunderCats wasn't born from someone's creative vision for storytelling. It was born from Telepictures and Rankin Bass wanting to compete with the massive success of Masters of the Universe and G.I. Joe. In 1983, both those franchises were proving that toy-based cartoons could be incredibly profitable. Every episode was essentially a half-hour commercial, and the toys generated far more revenue than the shows themselves. The problem was that ThunderCats didn't have toys when the show was being developed. The production company approached toy manufacturers with the concept, but initially, nobody wanted to make ThunderCats action figures. The designs were considered too complex and expensive to produce. The characters had detailed armor, weapons with multiple parts, and intricate features that would drive up manufacturing costs. LJN eventually agreed to produce the toys, but only after the show proved successful. This created a bizarre situation where the first season of ThunderCats aired without any toys available. Kids loved the show and wanted the action figures, but they couldn't buy them. Parents were frustrated, toy stores were getting constant questions about when ThunderCats toys would arrive, and LJN was scrambling to get production ramped up. The toys finally hit stores in late 1985, months after the show premiered. By that point, demand was enormous. The first wave of figures sold out almost immediately. LJN couldn't manufacture them fast enough to keep up with orders. The company had severely underestimated how popular the show would become and hadn't prepared adequate inventory. This shortage actually helped build the brand's mystique. Kids who couldn't get the toys wanted them even more. The reverse of the typical toy cartoon model affected how the show was written. Usually, toy companies would dictate what characters appeared and when, forcing writers to include new figures that were about to hit stores. But since ThunderCats toys were delayed, the writers had more creative freedom in the first season. They could develop characters and stories without pressure to showcase specific toys at specific times. This freedom contributed to the stronger storytelling in Season 1 compared to later seasons when toy marketing became more influential. Number 11. The original ThunderCats design looked completely different. The ThunderCats we know and love from the show went through radical design changes before reaching the screen. The original concept art from 1983 shows characters that barely resemble their final versions. Lion-O was initially drawn as much bulkier and more brutish, looking more like a barbarian than the noble leader we got. Cheetara wore significantly less clothing, with a design that network censors would never have approved. Tigra's original design included him being bright purple with green stripes, a color scheme that was deemed too garish even for 1980s animation. Panthro was originally smaller and leaner, without his signature muscular build. The change to make Panthro the team's powerhouse came from wanting to give each ThunderCat a distinct physical presence and role. The biggest design change affected Snarf. In early concept art, Snarf was actually a large, intimidating creature that served as Lion-O's mount. He was drawn as tiger-sized, with sharp claws and teeth, more like Battle Cat from He-Man than the small, anxious creature we got. The decision to make Snarf smaller and comic relief came from wanting a character that younger children could relate to, someone who was scared and vulnerable in situations where the heroic ThunderCats were brave. The Sword of Omens itself went through multiple design iterations. Early versions had it as a massive broadsword that would have been impractical to animate. The eye in the hilt wasn't part of the original design that was added when the show's creators decided they needed a way to justify the sword's power and give it personality. The extending feature, where the blade grew longer when Lion-O called on its power, came from wanting to create a signature moment that could be used in every episode. Mum-Ra's design changed significantly too. Original sketches showed him as more zombie-like in his degraded form, with exposed bones and more graphic decay. This was toned down to make him less frightening for young viewers. His transformed muscular form was inspired by classic superhero comics, giving him a physical presence that contrasted dramatically with his decrepit appearance. The Thunder Tank and other vehicles went through numerous redesigns to make them both visually interesting and possible to animate consistently. The original Thunder Tank design was far more complex, with moving parts and details that would have been nightmare to draw repeatedly. The simplified version we got was a compromise between cool design and animation practicality. Number 10. The voice of Lion-O was already famous for another iconic character. Larry Kenney provided the voice for Lion-O, but most people don't realize he was already famous for voicing another beloved character from the same era. Kenney was the voice of Count Chocula in the cereal commercials throughout the 1970s and early 1980s. That friendly vampire selling chocolate cereal and the noble ThunderCat leader were performed by the same actor. Kenney's background was in radio before voice acting. He worked as a disc jockey and created various character voices for radio shows. This experience gave him incredible versatility. He could shift from Lion-O's heroic tones to Jackalman's sniveling voice to the deeper register he used for various other characters. On ThunderCats, Kenney didn't just voice Lion-O, he performed multiple characters in many episodes, something that was common in the 1980s animation to save money. The audition process for Lion-O was competitive. Dozens of voice actors tried out for the role. Kenney's read stood out because he gave Lion-O both strength and vulnerability. The character needed to sound like a leader who commanded respect, but also like a young man still learning and making mistakes. Kenney captured both qualities in his performance. One challenge Kenney faced was aging Lion-O's voice throughout the first season. The character starts as a boy but rapidly ages to adulthood after escaping. Kenney had to make his voice mature across multiple episodes, gradually dropping to a lower register and losing some of the youthful quality. He did this subtly enough that many viewers didn't consciously notice the change, but the progression made Lion-O's growth feel more real. Recording sessions for ThunderCats were often chaotic. Unlike modern animated shows where each actor records separately, the ThunderCats cast frequently recorded together. This allowed for more natural interaction and better comedic timing, but it also meant sessions could be loud and unfocused. Kenney became known for being able to stay in character even when other actors broke into laughter or the director stopped to give notes. Number 9. Mum-Ra was inspired by classic horror movies. Mum-Ra's design and character drew heavily from classic Universal horror films, particularly The Mummy from 1932. The show's creators wanted a villain who was genuinely scary, not just another power-hungry bad guy. The Mummy concept provided built-in horror elements that were still acceptable for children's programming. The transformation sequence where Mum-Ra calls to the ancient spirits of evil became one of the show's most iconic moments. This scene was carefully crafted to be impressive, but not too frightening. The creators wanted Mum-Ra to have a vulnerability that the ThunderCats could exploit, but it needed to make thematic sense. The reflection weakness played into the character. The pyramid where Mum-Ra lived was inspired by both ancient Egyptian architecture and haunted house aesthetics. It in his decrepit form and a booming, powerful voice when transformed. Japanese animation studio, Pacific Animation Corporation, had committed to other projects. Differences were noticeable. The animation quality varied more from episode to episode. Some character designs were slightly off-model. The stories felt less cohesive because different writers were working on episodes without the same level of coordination that existed in the first season. The later seasons introduced new characters like the Thunder Kittens and expanded the cast significantly. Some of these additions were driven by toy company demands. LJN wanted new figures to sell, and the show needed to introduce those characters. This shifted ThunderCats from being primarily story-driven to being more openly commercial. Number 7. Several episodes were banned or heavily edited. ThunderCats pushed boundaries for children's programming in the 1980s. and several episodes ended up being banned in certain markets or heavily edited for content. The most controversial episode was titled The Garden of Delights, which featured a villain who used illusions to trap the ThunderCats in scenarios based on their desires. The content was deemed too psychologically complex and potentially frightening for young children in some regions. Another episode dealt with themes of addiction when Lion-O became dependent on the sword's power. The metaphor was obvious to adult viewers, and some networks felt it was inappropriate for a children's show to address substance dependency, even metaphorically. This episode was pulled from rotation in several markets and didn't air during daytime slots in many others. Violence was a constant concern. ThunderCats featured more physical combat than many contemporary cartoons. Characters used swords, clubs, and various weapons. While nobody ever bled or died on screen, the action was intense. Networks in different countries had varying standards for acceptable violence. The UK version of ThunderCats had numerous scenes cut or modified to reduce violent content. Some episodes dealt with death and loss in ways that made censors nervous. When characters from Thundera appeared in flashbacks discussing the planet's destruction, these scenes reminded viewers that the ThunderCats were essentially refugees whose entire civilization had been destroyed. This dark backstory was considered too heavy for some markets, and references to it were minimized in certain versions. An episode involving the Burbles, the robotic teddy bears who befriended the ThunderCats, featured a storyline about them being captured and forced into labor. The slavery metaphor was clear, and some networks refused to air it. The episode wasn't technically banned, but was removed from regular rotation in many markets. Number 6. The theme song was written in one day. The iconic ThunderCats theme song, with its distinctive drum fill opening and memorable melody, was composed by Bernard Hoffer. In a single day, Hoffer was given minimal direction. Create something exciting that kids would remember, keep it under a minute, and make it sound adventurous. He went home, sat at his piano, and had the basic composition done within hours. The recording session happened quickly too. The budget for the theme song was limited, so Hoffer used synthesizers for most of the instrumentation rather than hiring a full orchestra. The drums were one of the few live instruments recorded to give the opening that powerful, attention-grabbing fill. The choice to start with drums was deliberate. It announced that something exciting was beginning. The chanting of ThunderCats at the beginning and throughout the song became instantly recognizable. That was performed by the voice cast during a recording session. They gathered around a microphone and shouted the name repeatedly, with different takes being layered to create a bigger sound. The energy in those vocals came from the actors genuinely having fun with the silliness of standing in a studio, yelling ThunderCats over and over. Hoffer composed music for 130 episodes total, creating unique scores for each one. This was unusual for 1980s cartoons, where music was often recycled extensively to save money. Hoffer's varied compositions gave ThunderCats a richer sound than many contemporary shows. He could score dramatic moments, action sequences, comedic beats, and emotional scenes with equal skill. The theme song never charted or became a pop hit the way some cartoon themes did, but it achieved something arguably more valuable. It became permanently embedded in the memory of everyone who watched the show decades later. People who haven't thought about ThunderCats in years can still hum that theme song. Number 5. The show's writers included serious science fiction authors. ThunderCats employed some surprisingly prestigious writers for a show that was essentially created to sell toys. Leonard Starr, who wrote the first 5 episodes, was a respected comic strip artist and writer who had created Mary Perkins on stage. His involvement gave the show a stronger narrative foundation than most toy-based cartoons. Peter Lawrence wrote many of the best episodes and served as story editor. Lawrence had worked on numerous animated shows, but brought a level of character development and thematic depth that elevated ThunderCats above typical Saturday morning fare. He understood that even in a show about cat people fighting an evil mummy, characters needed motivations, conflicts, and growth. The writing staff took the world building seriously. They created detailed histories for Thundera and Third Earth. developed cultures for the various species, and established rules for how technology and magic coexisted. Much of this background material never made it into episodes, but informed how characters behaved and how the world functioned. Some episodes dealt with surprisingly mature themes. There were stories about prejudice, about the costs of war, about responsibility and leadership. These themes were wrapped in action-adventure stories about cat people fighting mutants, but the underlying content was more sophisticated than the surface presentation suggested. The writers had to navigate constant notes from network censors, toy company executives, and animation studios. Every script went through multiple revisions. Some of the show's stranger plot elements came from mandates to include specific toys or avoid specific content. The writers became adept at working within these constraints while still telling coherent stories. Number 4. ThunderCats originally had more graphic violence. The original scripts and storyboards for ThunderCats included much more violence than what aired. Early drafts had characters visibly injured, showed blood from wounds, and included explicit deaths. All of this was removed before animation began. Network censors went through every script, marking content that needed changes. No one could be stabbed with a sword. Energy weapons couldn't be shown striking characters. Falls had to be survivable. The Sword of Omens underwent specific scrutiny as a blade weapon Lion-O used frequently. The solution was making the sword's primary function non-violent. The Eye of Thundera granted vision and insight more than the blade was used for combat. Mum-Ra's magic was toned down from original concepts. Early scripts had him using genuinely dark sorcery with disturbing visuals. The aired version kept his magic powerful, but reduced horror elements. His transformation remained impressive, but wasn't as grotesque as originally planned. The mutants were supposed to be more threatening villains with emphasized brutality. The versions that made it to screen were softened into bumbling antagonists who posed less genuine threat. Number 3. Cheetara was revolutionary for female characters in cartoons. In 1985, female characters in action cartoons were usually damsels in distress or token team members with limited roles. Cheetara broke that mold. She was fast, faster than Lion-O and the other male ThunderCats. Her speed was her defining characteristic, not her appearance or romantic potential. Cheetara fought alongside male characters as an equal. She wasn't relegated to support roles or protected by the men. In many episodes, she rescued male characters or took the lead. Her staff was as formidable as Lion-O's sword. She made tactical decisions and was trusted with important responsibilities. The character's design was carefully balanced. She needed to be visually appealing without being overly sexualized. Her costume showed less skin than many female cartoon characters of the era. Lynn Lipton voiced Cheetara and brought strength to the performance, giving her confidence and authority. Young girls watching had a character who wasn't just the love interest or someone needing rescue. Cheetara was a warrior, athlete, and leader with her own episodes and character arc. Number 2. The show's budget kept decreasing each season. The first season of ThunderCats had a relatively healthy budget by 1980s animation standards. Each episode cost approximately $300,000 to produce, on off-model more frequently as corner-cutting affected quality control. Voice actors had less studio time, meaning fewer takes and less polish. Music animation, focusing more on dialogue and character interaction rather than elaborate fight scenes. Number 1. The series finale was written but never produced. The story felt unfinished, like the ThunderCats were still out there having adventures. When the 2000 leaving a generation of fans to imagine their own conclusions. If you enjoyed these facts about ThunderCats,